Well, hello and welcome back. I hope you had a good lunch and that you are ready for an exciting afternoon. We've got some more great talks coming on over here. Thank you for working with us through that new change of URL. We'll be sure to post that on the Twitter webpage. But for those of you here, it looks like you found us. So great to have you here. And I am really looking forward to this next talk by Jameson Hampton. It's going to be Achieving Inclusivity Through Remote Work. So, Jamie, go ahead.
Hopefully everyone can see and hear me. I want to thank the Christopher and the rest of the organizers, the sponsors, everyone who put CouchCon together. It's been a really cool event so far, and I'm really excited for the afternoon. And thank you for taking the time to come see me talk. Some of the morning talks had some really cool audience participation, which was really fun. My talk doesn't really have specific audience participation, but I will be trying to keep an eye on the, feel free to say hi. I'll try to keep an eye on the comments and we can chat through it if possible. So we'll see what happens. It's my first time doing a virtual talk, and I'm really excited about it. And thank you so much for all of you for inviting me right into your own homes. It's very cozy. I really love what you did with the place. Thank you so much. So I just want to introduce myself real fast. My name is Jameson Hampton. My friends call me Jamie. I'm from, and I am right now broadcasting from Buffalo, New York, the home of bad sports. I make that joke at the beginning of all my talks, but right now, since there are no sports, I would say that I guess we're all tied. But it is snowing here, so we're losing in that way. I'm representing Greater Than Code. That's the podcast that I'm on. It's a tech podcast, if you haven't heard of it. We talk about tech stuff, but we kind of do it through the lens of the people who made it and their journey that got them to the point where they are in their career, because we think that that's a really important part. I also just literally yesterday started a new podcast called Stationary and Sassy, which is a Fast and Furious fan podcast. Maybe less relevant to your interest than a tech podcast, but maybe not. I don't know your life. I'm not actually representing a company right now. I'm in between jobs. So if you are hiring, job hunting during the pandemic is not that fun, please reach out to me. You can find me on Twitter at Jamie Bash. Feel free to friend me, talk to me, post about my talk, send me memes, send me pictures of your cats. The only thing that I ask is that I do use they, them pronouns. So if you're going to talk about me publicly, please keep that in mind. I'm just going to fix this to make sure I have it on my phone. Okay, cool. This way I can see your comments. But now I'm going to talk about remote work. This is a talk about remote work. It's a talk that I actually wrote before. I am going to kind of touch on what's going on right now, but I've been working on this talk since before everything that's going on happened. So this is a chart from the Stack Overflow Developers Survey in 2019, where they asked about how often devs work remotely. So as you can see, at least in 2019, a lot of people didn't at all. But 12% of people were full-time remote. So that's a pretty sizable chunk of the industry. And other people work remote part of the time. I think I will be interested in seeing the 2020 survey because I think it's going to be a lot different in interesting ways. But I will talk about that more later. In addition to this, in the 2017 Stack Overflow Developer Survey, they also asked a question about what were your top priorities when you're looking for a new job? And 53% of people said that remote options were one of their top priorities. So it is kind of a big thing that's important in our industry. Personally, I've been working in tech for about 7 years, and I've been remote for the whole time, 80 to 100% remote. And when I tell people that, I usually have a conversation that goes a little bit like this. And I know that from working with remote people that they've also had this conversation a lot. It's pretty common. And I also know that these kind of responses annoy a lot of people that are full-time remote. And I get that because sometimes people who have never worked remote have a tendency to think that it's like a walk in the park, like you're not really working. And that's not the case at all. It's still a job. You still have to do the same amount of work. In fact, I feel guiltier when I'm kind of taking breaks or whatever when I'm at home than when I am in an office, because in an office, you kind of have water cooler chat with your coworkers. It happens naturally, and you don't get that at home. So it can be kind of isolating not having this kind of chat. So this is part of a comic from the Oatmeal about remote work that a lot of it resonated with me, but particularly this resonated with me a lot as someone who's worked remote for long stretches of time. But ultimately, when I have these conversations, my responses are more like this. Because I love working remote. It really, really works for me, and it's been a huge help for me in my career. It helps me do my best work. And so I want to talk about why that is. I think the last one on this slide is a little bit of a monkey's paw, because now a lot of people have an opportunity to do remote work. But I still think it's really important to talk about why it works so well for me and for a lot of other people. So there's a lot of benefits about remote work. I'm going to talk about them at first, like a little bit in general. These are kind of benefits you'll see on any list of people, any list that people make about like why remote work is cool. That kind of apply to anybody. Flexibility is like a huge, huge thing. You know, maybe you want to start your day a little bit earlier or later. That's usually fine with remote companies. Maybe you have something you have to do at a specific time of day, like you have to pick up your kids from daycare at a specific time. It can be really good for that. And also there's no commute, which is also kind of a flexibility thing. But this is a big one for a lot of people. It's a big one for me. In Buffalo, we don't really have public transportation very well. And we also have bad weather, apparently all the way into May because it's snowing right now. But I don't have to dig out my car in the winter, so that's a big plus for me. And again, kind of on the flexibility theme, you have the freedom to work from anywhere. I love to travel. Obviously haven't been doing a lot of it lately, but normally I do a lot of traveling, a lot of conferences, visiting people. And if I'm visiting like my family in Texas or my friends in Chicago, I don't have to take time off necessarily. I can work remote from wherever I am during the day and then spend time with my friends and family in the evening. And so it gives you a lot of more flexibility about that kind of travel, which is really cool for me and for a lot of people. This one, your mileage may vary a little bit with. Some people find it really difficult to work from home because they will get distracted by things around the house, like the dishes, the laundry, the dog. This one's kind of out the window right now, which I'm also going to talk about more later. But in general, a lot of people, including myself, find that they have better productivity at home because you're not getting interrupted by coworkers all the time. You can often have longer stretches of time where you're just heads down coding, and that can be really great for people. Like, I know it's hard to find heads down coding time sometimes. In addition, the comfort of working from a space that you're already comfortable in is like real. It can't be understated. You can have your office however you want. You get up, it's there. It's really convenient and it's really comfortable. But again, that list was in general. And I'm going to kind of talk about some specific demographics and specific reasons that remote work works for some people. So I read a whole bunch of definitions for the word benefits. I liked this one. A lot of them also mentioned like advantageous or advantage was a word that came up in a lot of them. But I think the word benefits is really interesting because it can kind of mean a couple of different things. Because some benefits are nice to have. They're convenient, they're great. They make your life a little bit better than it might have been otherwise. But other benefits are things that you need. When we talk about like our benefits at work, they make it possible to do something that you might not have been able to do otherwise. And there are people for whom remote work is more than just a little bit of extra convenience. It's something they need to make it possible to do something that they wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. So I think it's cool to think about what benefits you want to offer people, but I think it's maybe more important to think about what problems or barriers you want to help people solve. And I like to think about the word benefits kind of in that context. As you may have seen from the title, this is also kind of a talk about diversity in our industry. So I'm going to talk a lot about why remote work can help diversity at your company. But first, like, why do you want that? Hopefully you already do. A big reason that you might want a diverse team is just because it's the right thing to do. It's great to have lots of different people on your team. It's great to have give people a fair shot and not discriminate against people. It's the right thing to do. Additionally, it also makes your team stronger for a couple of different reasons. First of all, having different perspectives represented on your team is going to make you better at anticipating problems and having empathy. I do a whole talk about user empathy. I can link it later. But it's kind of about the fact that we're not really great at anticipating the needs of people who have a different set of needs than us. And there are things that you can do to get better at that. But also just having a lot of people on your team with different needs kind of spreads that out and lets different people be thinking about it from different angles. An example I like to use with this is I read about a team that was working on like those automatic hand dryers that they have in bathrooms when those were kind of new. And you like put your hand under and it like turns on automatically. So they had done this whole product and they had put it out and it was in bathrooms. They tested it. And then they found out once it was like in the wild that it didn't really work effectively for people who have black skin. And so that was embarrassing because they should have thought of that and they should have tested for it. But I think the reason that it was particularly embarrassing is that it made it very transparent that they did not have any black people on their team. Because if they had any black people on their team working on it and testing it with them, this would have come up and it didn't come up. So that's really important. Also, you're just going to land talented people. In general, the tech industry has kind of a diversity problem. A lot of people are just hiring people for culture fit, people that already look like them. So not only is their team going to not have these better perspectives and they're going to put out this embarrassing hand dryer, but also they're like not getting the best candidates because they're only looking at a narrow section of the population. And like those candidates are there and you can hire them and they'll be great on your team and it benefits everybody. I also want to touch real quick on diversity versus inclusion, which are like two kind of separate things. This is pretty well trod area and when we're talking about diversity in tech, but I do think it's important. Diversity is about having a team that doesn't all look the same. You've got different kinds of people represented. But inclusion goes a step farther than that, and it's about making those people feel comfortable and integrated. This graphic I think is helpful. I don't like the way that the arrows go. I think the arrows should maybe point the other way. But as you can see on the left, you kind of have diversity. You've got different kinds of people. But on the right, it's more like inclusion because those people are kind of integrated into one team. And so if you have diversity without inclusion, it alienates the underrepresented people that are on your team. It makes people feel like, you would rather have an About Us page on your website that like brags about having different kinds of people. You care about that more than you care about like actually supporting your employees. And eventually that's going to lead to less diversity because, underrepresented people aren't going to want to stay at your company. But on the other hand, inclusion fuels diversity because then you are going to retain those people. And in fact, you're going to attract more diverse candidates because underrepresented people in tech talk to each other and find out what companies are good at this and then go and like specifically try to work at those companies. That's something that I'm going through right now and it's a very real thing. So as I said, I want to talk about some specific demographics that benefit, I think, from remote work in kind of unique ways. So the first one I'm going to talk about is people who have chronic illness or disability. And I do want to say that there are tons and tons and tons of different kinds of illness and disability that have different symptoms and different challenges and different needs. So this is kind of general. But in addition to that, I do want to disclose that personally, I have pretty severe anxiety disorder. And so that's a big part of the reason why working at home is so important for me. And I'm going to talk about that, that context, because it's improved my life a lot and it's kind of, what I know. This is a kind of personal talk, so I'm a little nervous, but it'll be good. So first of all, accessibility concerns. Again, lots of different disabilities have different accessibility concerns, but that's actually kind of the whole point. The best place probably that someone is going to have the best accessibility is maybe at their own house where they've already set things up and they have total control over their environment, rather than in an office building where accessibility might be a problem. And kind of on that notion, people could have difficulties getting to work, getting out of the house, or getting out of bed in the morning. Before I was fully remote, I used to miss a ton of work because there are days when I feel bad in the morning. It feels too hard to get out of bed, but I could still work. In fact, sometimes in those situations, working is great for me because it kind of provides a distraction from what I'm going through otherwise. So being able to do that instead of taking sick time has been really good. And flexibility kind of goes in with that too. Flexibility is great for everyone, but some people are going to have a more tangible need for it. You know, if I have a panic attack early in the morning, maybe I need to go back to sleep for a couple of hours before I'm useful at anything. And again, I used to have to take a whole sick day because I was going to be an hour and a half or 2 hours late. But now that I'm working remote, I often can just sleep in, get to work a little bit later when I'm feeling a little bit better, work a little bit later into the evening, and there's a whole day of productivity that I didn't lose. Also, people with chronic illness often have frequent doctor's appointments. Those also require more flexibility than other people might need. When I say energy conservation, there's a metaphor I really like to use called spoon theory. I actually do a whole talk about spoon theory also. I can also link it. But essentially, it's getting at this idea that we all have a finite amount of energy every day. And the spoons are like the metaphorical energy unit that you're spending when you do things. So, you know, if you spend all your spoons, if you spend all your energy, then it's gone and you don't have the energy to do anything else in the day. So that's true, I think, of everybody. But this is like a big thing that people talk about in the chronic illness communities because people with illness and disability have to ration their energy in a way that other people don't. And so if you're rationing your energy, you can save a lot by like not having to get ready in the morning, not having to commute. You can be like fresher at the beginning of the day and have more energy to do other things. Also, people just want to be private about their health issues naturally. If a lot of people who struggle with this kind of thing have good days and bad days. And maybe like you don't want people to see you on your bad days. And maybe if you're working remote, that just means not turning on your video for one day. So that preserves a lot of privacy for people. You know, if I have a panic attack at home, it like sucks and it's hard. But if I have a panic attack like at an office, it's awful and it's really embarrassing and hard to come back from. So it's like a very different situation to be in. I kind of have already gotten the idea of like there are underrepresented people in our industry. And I think that in a lot of ways, remote work can be a more comfortable experience for us too. Energy conservation is a thing again. Normally that metaphor is used, it was coined specifically for people with chronic illness, but I've used it for underrepresented groups before because I think there's a similar energy cost of it takes more energy to do things in an office. Here are a couple of the reasons why. Code switching. So we talk a lot about bringing your whole self to work. I think that's really nice. I don't think that's a bad thing to talk about, but also I don't think anyone really does that. Because everybody talks different to their friends than they do to their coworkers. And if you're not part of the majority in group, that's like even more true. Like that might mean that the slang that you use with your friends that are from the same ethnic group as you is different from other people. For me, it means that the way I talk about my life in a group where everyone is queer is very different from when they're not. So there's an energy cost associated with kind of deciding when to code switch and making those kind of calculations. Microaggressions is also a huge topic. But what I mean by that is kind of like small, indirect, maybe unintentional discriminations against minority groups. And they totally happen in the office. This might be something like someone telling off-color jokes that make you uncomfortable, making assumptions about people. It's really tough for me when people like assume I'm straight and I have to like come out to them about it. Another one for me is like getting misgendered is really big. And even if people are, you know, trying to avoid microaggressions, they're just a thing that happens. And even though they're small, they add up and they take up energy. Related to this is this idea of like fitting in or feeling like an outsider. Someone once told me about a story about their kind of career path. He worked in a series of jobs where he was the only Latino in the office and felt like his coworkers just didn't really understand him and his background. And then he got a fully remote job that was kind of async, and there were people all over the country, all over the world on the team, all remote. And he said that it was like the first time that at a job that he didn't feel like he stuck out, because everyone was so different that there wasn't really an in-group and a minority group in that way. And I thought that was a really cool story, actually. Additionally, resources can be an issue. It can be really expensive to work in like a white collar industry. Think about someone who comes from like an underprivileged background. Maybe they just did their first coding boot camp and they're looking for their first tech job. Well, maybe they don't have like a wardrobe for a business casual office and they can't afford to put one together yet. Maybe their coworkers want to go out to lunch together and they like can't afford to go spend money on lunch at the lunch place. Maybe even transportation, getting to and from work, can be a barrier. And that kind of leads me into location-based diversity, which I think is really important. And I think it doesn't get talked about enough, but this idea that like people who come from different places, who live in different places, who have different backgrounds, they have those different perspectives that are going to make your team stronger. Not everyone has the resources to live in major urban areas. And when we talk about tech, a lot of jobs are in New York and the Bay Area, the two most expensive places to live in the whole country. So like not everyone can afford it. Maybe some people have family obligations. They have family members to take care of or people they can't be too far away from. And they feel like they can't move away to like a different metro area. That's probably more common in people from different backgrounds because different cultures kind of value that differently. Maybe you have people with visa issues. I think it's really cool to have people actively working on your team from other countries. It gives you those perspectives. It kind of spreads out your time if you need coverage, but it can be hard to like for them to move to the US and work. And it could be better to like kind of work from where they are. Again, about coverage is a big one. And again, these are factors that could affect probably anybody, but they kind of disproportionately affect underrepresented folks because of people who have underprivileged backgrounds, people who have different cultures, live in different places. This is something that like comes up with different demographics, I guess. So I've talked about some general stuff, but I also kind of want to talk specifically, focus specifically on the trans community for a little bit. And the reasons I want to do that is, one, I'm trans, and I think it's important to talk about what you know, and also what's important to you. And this is really important to me. The number of trans people working in tech is growing a lot. And that means that the likelihood that you have a trans coworker or that you will have a trans coworker is growing. And I think it's really important to understand that perspective so that it will help you work with people more effectively. Also, I think the reason that the number of trans people is growing is because remote work is possible in tech, and it's not possible in all jobs. And I think there are unique reasons why trans folks can want remote jobs. And so what are those reasons? That's what I'm going to talk about. Transitioning is just really hard in general. It's a really huge change in one's life. It's a change for the better, but any kind of big change comes with challenges. And additionally, you also have to worry about like if people are going to like accept or respect you when you're transitioning, which is uniquely difficult. And even if you're in a good situation at your office where you have a bunch of people who want to be respectful, which isn't always the case, unfortunately, but even when it is the case, there are still unique challenges. Lots of trans people have big baggage about their wardrobe. It can make it really difficult to navigate like a business casual world. Also, a lot of people, when they first come out, essentially have to replace most of their wardrobe kind of all at once, which is really tough. It's usually a thing that happens over time. And so newly out trans people often don't have a ton of like appropriate clothes to wear to work. And that can be difficult and expensive and stressful. There's also big baggage with like what bathroom to use. I cannot express to you how stressful this is as a trans person. I don't have enough time to do so. It would take an hour, but you might have somewhat of an idea if you've seen like, the bathroom bills and things like this in the news. This is like kind of a hot topic. I'm going to link at the end also to another talk that's kind of specifically about some of these, like having trans coworkers. That's really, really good. That does cover this in kind of more detail. The existential horror of being perceived in my physical form. As if feeling super self-conscious about your appearance isn't bad enough, which a lot of trans people experience, transitioning also often comes with kind of awkward teenage phases where your appearance is changing and it's uncomfortable. This is especially true for people who are doing like hormone therapy, which not everybody does, but a lot of people do. And so it can be a relief to just feel like, I feel super bad about how I look today. I'm going to keep my video off. It also, again, helps preserve privacy. I've been very open about my transition, but it's very natural to want privacy during it. And this helps a lot with that, to not have to go in every single day and people like observe how you're changing over time. When you first come out, people have to learn your new name and pronouns. And even well-meaning coworkers will sometimes mess this up because it's really hard. But I find it much easier to practice and get good at it when you're using like a text-based mode of communication, because it gives you a little bit more time to think about what you're going to say and maybe correct yourself before you just blurt something out. At my last company, everyone was really respectful of me. On Slack, everybody always got my pronouns right. But then sometimes when we like did in-person company meetups, people would get it wrong a lot. And they were trying, but it was just harder for them in person. And so that was really tough for me because they were doing their best, but it made it really hard for me to be comfortable like in-person gatherings. Also, it can be really anxiety inducing to like correct people. And I find that easier to do where you can just kind of like subtly say something over text rather than having to like speak up in person or on a call and like interrupt. So that's been really helpful for me too. Also, not all trans people have surgery, but many do. I did. It was almost 2 years ago and I had my surgery. And I was really worried about like having enough sick time to take off of work. But I ended up not having to take a ton of time off of work because I hit a point where like my brain was feeling fine, but I couldn't really get out of bed and walk around. And so I was working like right from bed, which is really great. And people didn't have to like look at me while I was recovering, which was also a relief. So I talked a lot about the benefits of remote work, but there are cons of remote work too. There are already a lot of talks and articles that kind of go into the challenges of remote work, tips for working effectively. Particularly now, there's been a huge rash of them. The market is flooded with them, which is really nice actually, because people who are already good at remote work like want to help people that are suddenly new to remote work, which I think is like great in our community. But I also think that the phrase already good at remote work, which I just used, is kind of the key that I want to get into, which is that there's kind of a remote mindset. It's not always easy. It takes work to be remote. And it doesn't always come natural to everyone. It's a skill that you can practice and get better at over time. And also, a healthy remote environment isn't something that just happens. It's something that you have to decide that you want and take intentional steps to make a healthy remote environment. Again, there's lots of kind of coverage of this in general, but I'm going to talk about some specific things that I find are relevant to some of the stuff I've already been talking about. Text-based communication is a big thing. Not all communication is over text if you're working remote, but a lot of it is. So this slide is going to have a bunch of tips that I think will be helpful for everyone, but are particularly helpful for me as someone who struggles with mental illness specifically. So here's some good things about text-based communication. The messages are just there. You can go back and read them again. They'll exist there in Slack or wherever. One of my anxiety symptoms is memory lapse. If I'm feeling really anxious, I'll just forget things. And so it's really helpful for me to be able to go back, see exactly what someone said and like the context in which they said it. It also kind of gives you more time to respond to people. Being put on the spot with questions can be anxiety inducing also. Async culture helps with that. But even in a situation where someone texts you and needs something kind of like right away, you still have a little bit more time to think about how you want to word it, and that's important to me. But text-based communication is also has a lot of challenges. First of all, tone is really, really hard to convey. And my anxiety makes me worry like a lot about people's tone. I like overanalyze the words people use. It's not great. So you have to be really explicit about your expectations. And I think over communication is better than under communication in this instance. Like, tell me explicitly if your request is urgent or non-urgent, especially if you're sending it after hours. I think clarifying tone can feel like awkward to people, but it really helps. And I don't think it's silly. It sounds a little bit silly, but I think emojis also really help. I love emojis. They really can put a lot of tone into text. I'm going to tell a story. My old company had a Slack emoji that we made and like custom uploaded that said WIC, which is an acronym, actually. I'm going to tell a story about my dad, who I'm pretty sure is watching right now. So, hi, Dad. But he used to text me all the time when I was younger, like, call me. And I'd freak out. I'd be like, why? What happened? What's wrong? Am I in trouble? What's going on? And then I would call him and he would like tell me like a funny story that happened. And so we came up with this like WIC, when you can, acronym that we used specifically to convey like, I want to tell you something, I want to talk to you, but it's not that important and it's not bad. And we started using that at my old job for the same context. And it was like really helpful, actually. And that's kind of about giving as much context as you can for messages. Like, again, if someone calls me without telling me at work, or like ask me to, can you hop on a call right now? There's 1,000 ways that I'm overthinking that. What is it urgent? What happened? What's broken? Am I in trouble? Like, what's going on? But if someone just takes like a few more seconds to say, hey, can you hop on a call right now? It's time sensitive, but it's not an emergency. It's about this project that you're working on. That might take them 10 or 15 seconds more to give me the message, but it saves a lot of anxiety for me. So I think the first step to kind of being a good advocate for these kind of things, especially in a remote situation, is like listening to people and getting different perspectives on it. So you're kind of all doing that right now, listening to me. Thank you. That's the first step. But I want to talk about kind of some actionable tips for remote, particularly for like a distributed team. You'll hear a lot the phrase remote first culture. Not always can you be in a situation where every single person is remote, but sometimes when some people are remote and others aren't, they're like in an office, then the remote people are missing out on conversations that are happening in person. That might mean socially, they're just not getting as much social time, not getting to know as many people as well. That's a little bit inevitable, but it can cause people to get overlooked for opportunities, which, like I say on the slide, it's something that underrepresented people already struggle with a lot. Also, sometimes people will get left out of conversations that are directly related to something they're working on. Like if two people just pass in the hall, like, hey, let's talk about this project. It can make it really hard for another person or remote person that's working on that project too to not have the context of all those conversations. So again, this is like hard for underrepresented people already, and remote work, when it's done wrong, can like make it worse really actively. But there are things that you can kind of just like subtly do, even if you're not like a manager and making decisions about if you're a remote first culture. If you're in one of those conversations and someone, and you know that there's a remote person that's also on this project, just say something like, hey, you know, Jamie works on this project too. They're not here. We should probably include them in this. Can we talk about this later when we can get everybody on? This one's a huge pet peeve for me, but I feel like it must make other people uncomfortable too. But I hate being on a video call where there's like a bunch of people in person on one video and then like a couple of remote people calling in. It's impossible to keep up with that conversation. There's lag, there's weird noise coming from the room. It's just, I can't understand what people are saying and I can't chime in. It makes me feel so left out. It makes me feel more left out than if I just didn't get invited to a meeting. It's so frustrating. So at my old company, I complained about this. We did have a bunch of people who were in our office in New York City. And what we ended up doing is, like, when we had a big call with lots of people, we made everyone get on separate laptops. So even though there were 15 people in the office and then 10 people remote, those 15 people in the office would all get their laptop out, put their headphones on, and like call in, and then you get like the Zoom call where everybody's face is there, and it feels much more like a remote call, and everyone's kind of on a level playing field. Again, microaggressions, cannot cover all of them, huge category. But like in general, a really good way to support underrepresented folks in an office is to get better at identifying microaggressions so that you can A, not do them yourself, and B, notice when other people are doing them and kind of say something about it. So I'm going to talk about just a couple that kind of relate to the specific stuff I've been talking about. Don't comment on people's appearance on video calls. I'm not talking about like, I like your new haircut, that's fine. But maybe someone is looking under the weather, maybe they look really tired, maybe they have some bad acne, maybe they're wearing pajamas. There's no reason to comment on any of those things. It's only going to make people uncomfortable. A lot of places push for everyone having their video on during remote calls. I do think that that's like, there's value in that. I think it helps people get to know each other better, like a more natural rapport between your team, I guess. But I also think that if someone like occasionally wants or needs to keep their video off, you should just let them do that and don't comment on it. No one needs their video on every single meeting, every single day to get that kind of rapport. And there's probably a reason if they want to turn it off every once in a while. Also, correct name and correct pronouns are not something that you should only be doing when you're with the person that you're talking about. Especially like I said, I was in a situation where I was remote and I had coworkers in the office, and I was constantly stressed out about like, well, are they misgendering me in the office when I'm not there? This is a thing that people worry about for real. But don't let that happen. It's disrespectful. And it's also, you're not getting good practice to get it right when you are with that person, and then they are going to know. This one comes with a little bit of a caveat. You should talk to your coworker about kind of what they feel comfortable with this. My experience is a lot of trans folks will be really appreciative for folks that take this on, but everyone has different comfort levels with this. So don't assume when you can ask. Like I said, I started writing this talk before kind of the COVID-19 situation that we're in happened, but I would be remiss if I didn't talk about it because a lot of people are new to working from home. Welcome. As I said, a lot of remote people want to try and support people that are new to it. But I do think there's a couple of, well, probably more than a couple, but a couple that I'm going to talk about, like really big ticket remote concepts that are coming up. So I think it's really kind of a revolution in some ways that we have a bunch of people working from home for the first time. There have been people like me who have been advocating for a long time, like these are the reasons why I need to work remote. These are the reasons why it's helpful for me. And some people have been told like, oh, well, we can't at our company. We see why it would be helpful for you, but we can't. Well, it turns out it's hard, but we can, and we are. So I think in some ways that's a bit of a Pandora's box situation. I think it's going to be really hard to put that back in the box now that folks that have been wanting these kind of accommodations are getting them. When this is done and we go back to quote unquote normal, I have no idea what that means, but I think it's going to be really hard to tell those folks like, well, we can't again, so come back to the office. On the other hand, you have people that are working from home for the first time and they're like, what? This sucks. Well, guess what? Of course it sucks, because suddenly having to work remote forcibly in the middle of COVID-19 is not a healthy remote environment, and is not what working remote is normally like. We're not normally under the stress of living in the middle of a global pandemic. We're not normally stuck inside our houses all the time, potentially with your spouse who also can't go to work, or your kids who can't go to school, all the distractions that come along with that. And I'm really worried that people will assume this is what remote work feels like and be like, well, I tried working remote and I hated it. Yes, we're all struggling with it right now. But I really want to urge people to kind of realize that it's a different situation and not like judge the concept of remote work on how hard it is right at this exact moment. Well, what about the future? I think it's really hard to even speculate about the future right now. Like, gosh darn it, we just don't know what the world is going to be like in a few months, which is really scary. But I also think that while we're in a tough situation right now, if we're thoughtful about it, at least in the context of remote work, that potentially we can change the landscape in ways that are exciting and will help people long term. If we integrate remote work into our lives as like a standard thing and we think about it in the right way. And I hope, for me at least, I'm hoping that that could be a bit of a silver lining with what's going on. Maybe this will help people going forward into the future. I have a few talks. I will link these in Slack in the track 2 discussion. The spoon theory talk that I did, I mentioned. This is a talk from RailsConf by Maria Zashin about going remote. Again, there's a lot of talks about that. I think this is a good one. Trans I for the Cis Ally, my friend Julian Fitzpatrick did this talk. I mentioned it also. Good watching. And thank you so much. I did a bad job checking the comments. I said I was going to. So I'm going to look at the comments right now. I think I have a little bit of extra time, a few minutes, if anyone has like questions. I can maybe take a couple questions. So just looking at my comments on my phone. I feel like I'm not paying attention to you, but actually I'm trying to pay better attention to you. Yeah, a couple of people were talking about childcare and homeschool. That's like I can't even imagine. I don't have kids. And I know some of my friends who are working right now have young kids in the house, and like, it just sounds like a stressful nightmare, and it's affecting people's productivity in such real ways. Oh, my dad's making jokes about how I need to call him, and it's urgent apparently, but I'm not going to call him. So anyway, it looks like I haven't gotten any questions specifically. I will be around in Slack if you want to ask questions later. I really appreciate it. This is a personal talk. It means a lot to me to be able to give to an understanding audience, and keep in touch. Please stay safe. Please stay healthy. It's really cool that we were able to do CouchCon as like a get together with the community. The tech community means a lot to me, so please stay safe and healthy. And hopefully Chris is going to come in and say something, because right now I'm just live streaming. Aw, Coraline is here. Thank you, Coraline. Oh, I'm so glad you saw it. Okay. I have Chris has just informed me that both the talks finished at the same time. So I have to entertain you for 30 more seconds. That's fine. Too bad. If I had known, I would play a song, my ukulele, but I don't have it. I'm not ready. I've been watching. There's a Facebook group called Socially Distant Fest, and people are like posting. They're like live streaming, playing music and stuff like all the time, like thousands of people, and you can just go in and like watch whatever kind of streaming music you want. It's amazing. Oh, Jen, so many of my friends are here. Thank you, Jenny. This is really great. I hope that you'll stay and watch the rest of the talks this afternoon. I think CouchCon has been really great so far, and I want to support all of our speakers. We're having technical difficulties. Technical difficulty dance.
About to go live. All right, thank you. Thank you to both Jameson and to Matthew. Both our speakers finished at the same time, and unfortunately, I was not prepared for that. So I appreciate both of them at the end there. And those talks, I loved both of them. I was actually jumping in between them. I wish I had two different versions of me. Although right now I think I do because I'm on both of the tracks at the same time. So, but yeah, it was really great. Thank you for sharing, both of you. I appreciate it. And with that, we are looking at our afternoon tracks. We've got in track 1 we have Ed Watson, and he is talking about taking Power BI to the next level. And that'll be in about 10 minutes here for both of these. Track 2, we have Alexis Lee with, "Oh no, Mom got hacked again." And so that's about how to implement good security for the non-professional. So with that, we'll go ahead and hit a little session break here, and I'll look forward to seeing all of you with the next speakers in 10 minutes. Thanks.
So I am Alexis, and I am here to talk about security, specifically everyone who loves security and your security. So today I'm going to talk about how we can make security solutions for the non-professional that work. So again, hello, my name is Alexis. I go by Lexi. I am a junior penetration tester, and I am an information systems student at Cleveland State with a minor in compliance and a specialization in web and network security. So I do a lot at college, and that's most of my life right now. Because I'm in college, I don't have the typical 9-to-5 job. I have semester breaks, I have random holidays that the university offers me, and I'm home often. And one of those things being spring break. My spring break plans were sadly ruined due to the current global pandemic that's going on. But because of that, I'm home now. And don't get me wrong, I absolutely adore my family and my friends, but it comes with some not so fun things. Anybody that's ever worked in tech, whether it's security, development, quality assurance, has always dealt with playing personal family tech support. Everyone's favorite job, right? You love your family dearly, you want to help them, but there's only so much you can do. So now we're home. You're not relaxed. Aside from everything else that might be going on in your life, you have your uncle, your great aunt, and your mom asking you to help them fix their printers, fix their emails, and everything else that might potentially be wrong. Good news is you got a new job out of it. Again, you're playing family tech support. Bad news is none of your coworkers have been trained yet. Manager mother, director father, CFO cousin, none of them really know what they're doing yet. And you want to be able to help them because, again, you care about these people. They're your friends, they're your family. But they also don't come from the technical background you might have of working in a corporate software development environment. You can talk back and forth with your coworkers every day about technical things, but you can't necessarily do that with maybe your great aunt who barely knows how to operate her iPad. So due to this, going back and forth and having our own personal struggles, I was going back and forth with one of my mentors regarding this. And he was talking about one of his previous companies that he worked at, and he brought up a method that they use specifically in sales and help desk that they use to find solutions for customers. And it was ask, understand, personalize. And I ran with that. Now, I'm not in sales. If you paid attention to a little bit of my background, you could see that I'm very technical. I like my computers. So how can we take something that's sales oriented and make it computer oriented? Introducing DUCK. DUCK stands for discuss, understand, customize. So discuss is pretty obvious. You sit down and you discuss with your client, in which case this is your friend or family member, about what the problem is. So that's them coming to you and saying, I broke this. This isn't working. Why is this not working now, but it was working the other day? So that initial hump of getting the basic information that you need, and then understanding it. You might have a family member that maybe their printer jammed because their son shoved cookies in it. Why would there be cookies in the printer? Well, you got a 3-year-old kid there. Understand why this mistake might be happening, why this lack of security is happening. Is there a lapse of knowledge? Is there just a misconfiguration? Why is it occurring? And then customizing it. So the biggest thing there is sitting down with your customer, your family member, and bringing up a solution that works best for them. The goal of DUCK is to be able to develop a solution for and people that you care about that is tailor fit to them, to the point that they can stand it up and run it on their own with little to no intervention from you after. Everybody loves a custom solution. Working in the corporate world, we see it all the time. Clients love when you make one simple, small, customized module for this giant piece of software. It keeps the customer happy, and it keeps them coming back and relying on you for more updates, more software. And everybody's happy at the end. So the goal of having a customized solution for everybody is the goal of this. But you can't have that without sitting down and having a conversation about that. Having this sort of checklist will also make sure that you hit your points without being mean about it. Completely guilty as charged. I've had conversations with my mother, my father, friends, and other family, and I've come off harsh when trying to help them figure out different computer problems they might be having. It happens to the best of us. So by putting these in place, it'll be able to slow the corporate brain down, pull out the more personal frame, so you're able to derive a better solution without upsetting anyone you truly care about. So I'm going to go now into a few examples of Duck and how it can be used and why I feel it should be used. Granted, all of these are just examples. Depending on your situation and what you might be using this for, your situation is going to vary. You're going to have different solutions. You're going to have different conversations. But I feel like this is a great guide that you can put in a technical matter or in just everyday personal problem solving. So the first one, Grandpa locked himself out of his email. So you have your grandpa, and again, locked himself out of his email. Happens to the best of us. We forget our password. It happens. But here's the thing. He's called you 5 times in the past 3 days that he can't get into his dang Gmail account. Why does this keep happening? So, discuss. He obviously doesn't remember his password. He keeps on asking you how he can change it. But why is this not sticking? Why isn't he remembering it? It turns out he doesn't think it's important. He doesn't fully understand the point of a password, why it's needed, why he should remember it, why it needs to be something so complicated that he can't remember it. So he just changes it, uses his email, logs out, and then forgets it. Why doesn't he understand this? Why doesn't he understand passwords are important? Again, as you talk to him, you kind of figure out his threat model. In security world, you do these all the time. It's when you sit down with a group and you figure out what are the potential negative things that could happen to this piece of software if a bad actor, hacker, were to get their hands on it. What's the damage that could be done? He doesn't really have a threat model. Grandpa doesn't get out much. Grandpa likes to go to the grocery store, and he likes to go to see his friends every once in a while, and that's really it. And his computer doesn't have a whole lot of information on it either. We already know he has his email. Maybe he has a Skype account or a Zoom account. He likes to talk to his grandkids that way sometimes. Or maybe he has a Facebook account that he's on his old high school's class reunion group page. So he doesn't really have a whole lot of information that he feels is important enough to steal. The most important thing to him is somebody actually breaking into his house and taking his computer. As we all know, in the digital world, you don't necessarily need physical access to a computer in order to do negative things with a computer. So then we're going to customize a solution for him. So again, this man can't remember his password to save his soul. Let's write it down in a password notebook for him, or maybe a sticky note on his computer or somewhere, so you can give him a secure password, with all the password rules we love, having different numbers, capital letters, special characters, so he can create a long secure password and he's not struggling to remember it every time he wants to email his grandkid. I know what some of you guys are thinking. You claim you're a security expert, but you just told us to write down passwords. That's the cardinal sin of passwords. I know that and you know that. But we all weren't born knowing great security and great just cyber hygiene in general. We had to learn it. And as technology's progressed, we also learned that. We graduated from the password notebook to the password manager, to the YubiKey. It all depends on who you're dealing with. Grandpa already has a hard enough time getting on the internet as it is. It's a miracle he can log on to email. So maybe writing down the password on a piece of paper isn't the smartest, but considering his threat model and considering the fact that he doesn't have a whole lot of active information out there, and simply sitting there teaching him how to use a password manager just might be overall too time consuming and frustrating, we're going to give the solution that's best. And with that solution, Grandpa's going to be able to go back, log into his email without bothering you every day about it, because he's confident in something that he knows how to do. Anybody can read off a piece of paper. Anyone can do that. It's a lot harder to use an actual password manager, try to have a master password, line it up with every other site you're using, recycling the password if you want to do proper password hygiene. Baby steps here. Because hopefully, after we get, writing down the password down, as I said earlier, we all weren't security experts at one point. Maybe I can convince him to use a password manager. Maybe I can convince him to use some sort of physical security key. But we have to start small and make sure he understands why we're making these decisions and these security choices to begin with. We all start somewhere. So, moving on to my next one, phishing. So, you have a friend that sadly got caught in a scam. It happens to the best of us, and it's very sad to see, but again, it happens. So let's sit down with her and discuss what was going on. You love her, but she's gullible. She means well, she believes everything she'll read. Her reason for falling for this is, why would someone lie on the internet? Why would someone do that? That's mean, that's rude. Well, yeah, but not everyone in the world has good intentions, sadly, which is why phishing and scams exist in the first place, and they always have, and they always will. So in order to combat this, you need to understand, why maybe did she fall for this? Well, sadly, with phishing, as we all know, they like to pull at the emotional. So your friend was down on their luck, they needed some extra cash, and the email was from a legitimate site they've used before. Maybe it's Amazon. Everyone knows what Amazon is. So she trusted it. Or maybe it's the stereotypical, Nigerian prince scam. She has family in Nigeria. It's not too far off to receive some sort of email potentially from their government. So, in some cases like this, you can't be too upset. They had a legitimate reason as to why they were going down this path. But obviously, it's not the good one. They made a mistake, and it happens. So in this example, specifically, we're going to assume that we've already done everything to kind of reverse the identity theft. So we've already gotten their credit card information, we already freeze that, we already freeze their bank accounts and other assets they might have. So now it's just, how do we make sure this doesn't happen again? Because that would be a shame, wouldn't it? We just did all this work to get all of her information back and make sure she's safe and protected, just to go all the way back to square one. The customized solution here is she's already a little bit computer savvy. Let's just double check and make sure that her spam filter is on and properly configured. Sit down and teach her how to identify common types of phishing. We all know it. Misspelled names, pulling at the emotional heartstrings, the hyperlinks not matching up the trusted sites. Once you're able to give her that knowledge, she can use it for good. You give them the tools to defend themselves. What's the quote? Give a man a fish and he eats for a day. Teach a man to fish and he can feed himself forever. If we give her the tools to do this, she's able to help herself at the end. So here the important thing was understanding. Why was this going on? How can we prevent it from happening again? And maybe that also means some self-reflection on her part. Maybe save her money a little bit better. I don't know. Depending on whatever the situation is, you're going to have wildly different solutions and wildly different answers and reasonings as to why these things are happening. The goal is to take those thousands of different solutions and be able to provide thousands of different answers. So our next one is secrets. So my brother is applying for a job with the federal government. Very excited for him. This is a big time in his life. And he was complaining about how difficult it is to log in. We've all dealt with a janky password form before. Not every website is designed to be user experience friendly, so to say. So you kind of go back and forth about that, and when you get up to go to the kitchen to get something to drink, you peep over his shoulder. Something's not right. So you see that he is using his social security number as the answer to a security question. Why would you do that? That's your social security number. That's something that's supposed to be private. That's something that you're not supposed to just give out. That's something that you're going to need in the future for a bunch of important life-changing decisions and documents. You don't just hand that out willy-nilly. You give it to maybe your employer when you apply for a job, and you give it to the government when you file your taxes. That's it. Why is he doing this? So after your initial shock of, dude, what are you doing? And going back and forth, he hits you with this nugget of wisdom. It's a government website. He's applying for a federal job. They have his social security number anyways. It's something that's easy to remember, but hard to guess. Not everybody's just going to have that information. And again, it's a government job he's applying for. They already have this information on him. So giving it again isn't that big of a deal. Even me as a security person, he kind of followed a good set of logic there, especially when he was saying, it's something that's easy to remember and hard to guess. Isn't that what they say to use for other passwords and security questions? You want to make it easy for yourself to remember, but not others. We've all seen the correct horse battery staple XKCD comic. It's a very valid and quite real point. I don't blame him for believing that. And even then, I can kind of overlook the whole, well, it's a government website anyway. Fair, they already do have that information on file stored somewhere. But that still doesn't mean you should be giving it away. Just because your friend has your phone number doesn't mean you should be giving that same phone number to a random stranger. So who's to say that's not happening on government websites? So after you get your orange juice and you go back, you sit down and you try to figure out how you can teach him how serious this is. Have him run these credentials that he's been using through a database like Have I Been Pwned, and find any compromised accounts that might exist or any zombie accounts that he might have that he's no longer actively using. It's happened to the best of us. All of us at some point, or someone in our family, has been caught in a breach of some kind. It's perfectly normal and it happens. What you do after is important. Making sure you change your passwords to those accounts, making sure you lock up any credit card information you might have if it was a shopping website, making sure that, any other information that needs to be private stays private. So having that information there and being able to go, oh, I messed up, but then being able to fix it, it's going to be better for you in the long run. So if he's able to learn, well, okay, so people other than the government can possibly access my information, maybe he shouldn't use government information or any other personal information he doesn't want out there. A big one we see nowadays is everyone has a social media account, right? Whether you have Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Twitch, anything, you have personal information on there. You have your name, your birthday, maybe you have pictures of your spouse, maybe you have pictures of your kids and your pets. This is all identifiable information. There are security questions about, who was your fourth grade teacher? Well, I'm friends with my fourth grade teacher on Facebook. Anybody can find my Facebook account and go through my list of friends, find that name, and use that maliciously later. So it's more teaching about how to keep that information private. You can still have fun. You can still post your friends and family. You can still safely apply for jobs and do online banking or any other important information that needs to be done online, as long as they're safe about it. Here, it's teaching why that's happening in the first place and how to prevent it from happening again. So Paul here he works with social media marketing, which I know is wildly different from what we're talking about today, but what he said here has some truth. Personalization is pointless without knowing the individual. Understand the dreams, hopes, and fears that motivate your customers, and then hit them where it counts. Is this not Duck in a nutshell? So you have to sit down and understand what's going on and why. Again, are they making this mistake because they simply don't know? They just lack the knowledge? Do they not care? Do they not understand why? What is going on here that's making them do these quote-unquote terrible security mistakes that us in the industry, the second we hear them, red flags and sirens are going off? Because why would someone make that type of mistake? We know better. So once you're able to go over that hump and understand why, then you can create the perfect solution for them. And they're going to be proud of it. People don't want to learn if you're not going to be nice about it. Think about back when you were in K through 12 schooling. Your favorite teachers were probably some of your nicer teachers. They were the ones that were willing to sit with you after school and help you. They were the ones that were willing to adjust things if needed and not give you crazy assignment due dates. They were the ones that were willing to work with the students and yourself. So that leaves a great impact, Maybe you hated history. You cannot memorize dates. You cannot memorize these names of these presidents and generals and world leaders. You hate it. But then you grow up and you become a history teacher because you had that one person that took the time to sit and invest in you, make sure you learn and understand why this information is important, and then you can go on and do great things. That's what we're hoping to do here. I'm not expecting my friends and family to become, the next big security engineer, the next big bug bounty hunter. It would be wonderful if that did happen, if I was able to inspire them to do that. But it's not a given. That doesn't always happen. But if you're able to give them the tools and the power to help themselves, they're going to be more confident in everything they do. And your days of being tech support are numbered. You're not going to be getting calls every day from your friends and family annoyed that something broke. They'll learn how to troubleshoot on their own. They'll learn how to maybe fix something on their own and not even contact you. You'll end up being a last resort. Hey, I did this, and this is still broken. How do I fix it? I'm completely lost. Everybody is more willing to help someone if they admit that they're willing to try. And you need to give them the tools to try. And if that's, swallowing your own pride and being able to, in your head, you're the meme of the dog with the world on fire, everything is fine because you just heard the worst security mistake that has been made in your career. If you're able to push that down, swallow it, and talk to this person and think about why it's occurring and bridge that gap, you make yourself look good, number one, because you weren't mean about it, you weren't rude about it, and you genuinely tried to put in why. You truly tried to sympathize with that person and try to help them when they were maybe at their lowest, depending on the situation. And then they feel great because they're able to help themselves now. Asking for help is a big thing. Mentioning that you messed up is hard. A lot of people can't do that. So one, props to them for doing that and trusting you. That's a big responsibility. Don't take it lightly. Everyone loves XKCD, and I mentioned them earlier. Follows the same thing. Going back to your own personal, trying to turn off what I call corporate brain. Everybody doesn't know everything. People in security and technology, it updates so much and so often that it's hard to wrap your head around, and you're never going to learn everything. And then there are other things that just simply don't change. But there are still people that don't know that. Remember the first time you sat in front of a computer and you tried to write an essay for school, or write a Hello World program, or draw something on a tablet. You didn't know what you were doing, and you probably messed up once or twice. The big thing there was, I hope you had people there to help you, whether those people were physically there or whether they were online. Having people around and available to help you is what's going to change. If you posted a question on Stack Overflow and every response was something along the lines of, oh my God, you don't know how to do this already? How many people would learn how to program? I definitely wouldn't. That's not helpful. It's not constructive. So being able to look at somebody and go, oh my God, why don't you know this? And following that up with, let me show you how to do it, why I should do it, and why it's important is going to change everything. They're going to be more appreciative of you. You get the joy of teaching somebody how to do something new, which is always fun. And they're walking away with more knowledge and a better sense of self after. So that's about it for the main basis of the talk. I'm open for questions. I saw the chat kind of going as I was talking, so I'm going to answer some of those questions now. I do have examples on my website, thecyberrobotpilot.com. I try to update one with at least once a month, and I also put the beauty of Duck in that too. I have numerous different examples, some where the person barely knows how to turn on the computer, and some where, they're a computer science student. They're just making one mistake here, which happens. I hope what you walk away with this is a new way of thinking in both your personal life and your corporate life to solve different problems that might come your way. There's always going to be room for improvement, and there's always going to be room for change. But this philosophy and step-by-step introduction in and of itself will be something that will help you and any other team or person you come in contact with. So I'm not ignoring you. I'm looking at the chat. I know I saw some questions earlier. So, So if you guys are looking at the chat, if not, I'll read it off to you. Josh Gatka said, I always told people that if I had to choose between grandma using one password everywhere or hiding a notebook of passwords in her desk, I'll take the notebook every time. You have a point. So, and that's kind of what I was going with my example. You need to truly understand your customer, your friend, your family before you just throw a solution at them. You can tell somebody the most technical solution because you know the most technical solution, but that doesn't mean it's the correct one. The best solution is not always the correct solution, and that's okay. When you're teaching a kid how to write, you start off with those big fat pencils that you can barely hold in your hand, and that's to teach you how to grip the pencil. Obviously, you're going to grow up and use the better pencils, the smaller ones, the thinner ones, maybe move on to pens, but you got to start small. And that's what's great about Duck. You can teach that small step, and as they're wanting and willing to learn more because you created that open and welcoming environment, you're able to provide that for anyone and any type of solution. So Jem says, have I been pwned? Is it possible to not show up on that list somewhere? Oh, definitely. Nothing is perfect, and nothing is completely unhackable. So usually when something is caught in some sort of security or data breach, I can't remember the exact number off the top of my head, but it can take months before that information is released to the public, which is why your company might have mandatory password change day, even though, oh my God, I just changed this 3 months ago. I have to change it again, because even though the chances are rather low of you being caught in a breach in that such short period of time, it's not completely impossible. So staying on top of that game plan and making sure that you're secure is important. You want to be safe than sorry. I rather change my password 5 times in a year than not change my password at all, and oh no, everybody can access this really one important account that I need to do my work, my school, and everything else. You don't want that. So it's always good to check and see and make sure that you haven't been caught in anything first, but also try to prevent that from happening in the first place, and don't be ashamed about it. It happens. Hackers and cyber criminals are getting better and better at finding loopholes and security flaws in software, and it's bound to happen to every person and every company at some point or another. It's more of a matter of why and how you prevented it in the first place. If there was a valid attempt there, you're going to be able to remediate the problem easier. Jason asks, there's a lot of misinformation on social media. Is there any bad security-related advice you've had to warn people against? I kind of touched upon it a little bit earlier when I was mentioning the security questions with I believe I used it with the brother example. So putting out different information about just your personal life that you really don't have to share is number one. Make sure all your information is private. And then I don't really consider it a full security issue, but we've all seen those posts from our lovely older relatives, I post this on my timeline and Mark Zuckerberg doesn't have access to my Facebook photos. While not a direct security flaw in and of itself, we haven't taught people how to properly identify spam and false information. And that will just eventually snowball into them losing their entire retirement account, sadly. So being able to start small with that type of information and being able to teach people just proper online hygiene will help kind of remediate some of that. They're going to have the knowledge in order to help stop that. The biggest thing here, Duck, is less of a thinking philosophy and more of a solution philosophy. How do we teach people how to not do this again? It's a preventative measure, or at the very least, if it wasn't a preventative measure, it's definitely a lesson learned and can be used in the future. What's also good about this is that, so say I teach my best friend how to properly encrypt files. She can then teach someone else how to do that and teach them how to do it correctly, even if she doesn't have a super technical background. So by giving them the proper information there and giving them that solution, they're able to teach others, and therefore by you helping one person, you can help potentially tens of hundreds of people without even knowing it, because you open that line of communication for others too, by empowering them with the knowledge they need to go forth. A big way I've seen this in the corporate world specifically is during code remediation for security flaws. A lot of times there's arguments between the security side of the house and the development side of the house of why a change should or should not be made. So security team is saying, well, this needs to be fixed because this will make this part of the software vulnerable to this type of attack. And the development team goes, well, we're not changing that because if we change this, then we have to change all of this code all the way over here in this completely different class. So if you're able to sit both teams together, talk it out, and teach them why it's important to do those changes, you guys might be able to come up with a solution that works for both parties potentially. Maybe the security people don't know about this completely different class that ties in with this specific text box. And maybe the development team is relatively new developers and they haven't had their security training yet. So they don't know that this is a problem that this type of software is vulnerable to. So being able to just have an open forum to hash out everything and have that conversation and clear the air first before you even start trying to find solutions to the problem is going to be what fixes problems in the future, because you already know you have that open line of communication and you guys like each other. You were nice about it. You sat there and truly listened to why this was occurring in the first place. So then you can add that in and you're going to be more willing to ask a question again or admit that you messed up somewhere, because you know the other party is going to be receptive to that and help you. So thank you, Callista. I hope I'm saying that right. Do we have any other questions about just security or security problem solving in general? I'm going up to the remote questions now from Jameson's previous talk. I was hoping for this talk to be very relatable. Even if you're not a college student, we've all been home at some point having to deal with family and their computers. And it's gotten more and more popular due to, well, the coronavirus situation. There has been numerous times this week where I've been woken up by my mother asking for help with her computer setup as she's working from home. This kind of ties in a little bit to Jameson's talk from earlier. And using Duck in and of itself has personally helped me with that. I was able to identify why she was having the issue, because while I love her, she was just kind of like, my video chat isn't working, help. And so I had to sit there and reverse everything and go back and try to fix that. And I was able to help her and teach her how to do it on her own now by having this conversation with her. So you're able to use this for anything, really. So again, Callista goes, is there a preferred password manager? Each time I start using a password manager, I get a little overwhelmed and end up not using it more than a few times. I don't want to give a specific answer because I don't know your background. There's a bunch of different password managers, paid, free, pre-installed on your browser. It really all depends on what you're comfortable with using. Again, I don't know exactly everything you've tried yet, but I would suggest baby steps. Maybe start off with the default password manager that's installed in the internet browser you use, and then maybe graduate up to a password safe, and then maybe LastPass. It all depends on what you're more comfortable using. The biggest thing with password managers is simply being able to know how to use it properly. A lot of password managers also have options that you can put in answers to security questions or other things like that. So what are you comfortable with, what knowledge you have now, and what knowledge you believe you're able to learn quickly enough to assist with that. I will be hanging out in the Slack later, and my Twitter is also on here if you'd like to message me more about that, and I can give a more in-depth, specific answer tailored to you. Here we go again. I'm using Duck, and we can go from there, and we can hopefully find a perfect solution for you. So awesome. So SolidWire asks, awesome stuff for prevention. I know a lot of relatives that can benefit from this level of care. Do you have any suggestions if we are past the prevention point and into the recovery phase? Yes, and it's the same thing. So here, this fits in with the example I used earlier of the friend that got caught in the scam. So maybe they're talking to you now because, oh my God, they have access to all my bank information. Okay, let's calm down. Let's figure out what happened. What did you click? Who did you contact? Let's do that first. And then let's take care of the things we know we can't control. So maybe you have your banking app on your phone. Can you freeze your credit card right then and there? Or do you have to call them in 24 hours when the branch is open? Let's figure out what things we can do first and control, because if you give them that control then and walk them through it, they're going to feel empowered because they did this by themselves with just a little bit of hand-holding. So we start with the stuff we can control first and then walk them through what will happen next. Maybe you know what's going to happen next because you've been through this situation before. No one wants to walk into something blind. So tell them what potentially might happen next. You know, you might get a call from your bank asking for any weird charges. You might want to make a report with someone at the FCC about, you know, a scam email that occurred. So figuring out what they already done, what they know how to do, and what they need to do next will help figure all that out, and you can create a solution from there to make sure everything is recovered to the best that you can, and then move on to the prevention phase. So in that case, I would add 2 C's to duck because there's 2 customizations periods there. And we also have Josh giving some password manager recommendations. Thank you for that. Maybe you should have done a talk here about different password managers. And he has a point there talking about there's a bunch of different options, and that's obviously very confusing. So that's when you have to sit down with your client or your family member and go, what do you know how to use and what are you comfortable with using? You just don't want to throw something highly technical at them that they're not going to fully understand. So maybe at first just having a free one on your desktop that doesn't sync to your phone yet is a good start. Kind of get your feet wet a little and learn, and then move on to, you know, the big password managers that you can pay and have 5 family members on. It really all depends on what you're trying to protect, how serious that information is, and what you're comfortable with using at the moment. Everybody's yelling duck. A little bit about duck. So as I mentioned earlier, little Easter egg, if you will. This was derived from a philosophy that was used at one of my old mentors' employers. And it kind of has 2 meanings. The one being rubber ducky debugging. Everybody in programming knows what that is. You talk to a rubber duck, usually, or some other small toy on your desk, and you're able to get an answer. You kind of walk through the problem and then, oh, I know how to fix that. And 2, I collect rubber ducks. I have over 150 rubber ducks. I have one right here. This is my first talk I've ever given. This is my lucky rubber duck. He was sitting here the whole time. And with that, it's just a fun little thing I have. So with that said, Chris just told me I have about a minute left. I'll take any last minute questions I can answer in that minute. If not, again, I'll be free in the Slack channel for just about the rest of the day. Thank you to everyone that attended. Thank you to everyone that helped set this up. I was very happy to come and do this today, and I know all the other speakers were happy too. And I hope everyone got something new out of this and a new way to look at security problem solving in the future. I don't want to just leave you guys though, because we still have a couple of seconds left. This is what's hard about these types of things. I'm glad I was able to help you guys out. Yep, that works. So thank you guys. Have a good rest of your day.
All right, well, thank you, Alexis. That was a great talk. I loved hearing it. Definitely got a few things about password management on my side that I still need to look into. It was so very relatable in terms of the family support as well. I can't, I related to so much. I love how you give the different roles of the people in there. So that was really great. So for our next talks, we've got in track 1, the other track, we've got the fundamentals of continuous software design with Jeremy Miller. And in track 2, this track here, we've got why you fail to make good predictions and what you can do about it. And that's with Sho Fola. So we look forward to seeing you. We're going to take a little 10-minute mid-session break here, and then we'll wrap up with our last session of the day. So don't miss out, and we'll see you in a few minutes here. It looks like I've kept myself live over the mid-session break video. Here we go.
Hello, everybody. It's been a long day. This is the last talk for today. I'm going to make it worthwhile your time. First of all, I want to thank you for taking out time this Saturday to actually, be here today. There's a lot going on, and it doesn't hurt to have a distraction. Hopefully, I'll make this worth your time. So my name is Shofola Shoboejo. I go by Sho. Some people also call me Fola. And I am a manager at MailChimp, and I manage a team of machine learning engineers. My day-to-day job, as far as the kind of machine learning models we build, is always trying to predict and forecasting different things that you can use machine learning for. But the talk I'm going to be giving today is more so about, you and I, in terms of the predictions we try to make, and talk a little bit about, why we fail to make good predictions and what we can actually do about it. It might be a bit fitting to maybe start with a game. Unfortunately, because we are kind of apart and not right next to each other, it's hard to kind of play this game. But it's a game, if possible, I'll have loved to play, dealing with, how you can predict how many gumballs are actually in a gumball machine. And since we don't have a gumball machine and we're not in the same location, I went with the next best thing. So we've actually seen someone try to play a similar game on Brain Games. Brain Games is a show that I really enjoy watching with my family. It's available on Netflix. And in this particular episode, they had a couple of people, roughly 25 people, and they were trying to predict how many gumballs were in a gumball machine. And as you might imagine, it was a wide range of results that it had. Everything from like 225 to close to 12,000, a pretty wide range. But the interesting thing about it is that even though many people were kind of off on the actual number, when it took an average of all the guesses, it came out to roughly about 2,425. And lo and behold, when you actually found out how many gumballs were actually in the gumball machine, it was actually very close. They were only about 22 gumballs off. Now, that's really interesting. I don't think I would have expected that, but it's really interesting to see that when making predictions, there are things that you and I can essentially do to actually increase our chances by being right. So in the case of the example I just showed with the gumball machine, it was how you can leverage wisdom of the crowd. In order for us to talk about being good at making predictions, I think it's maybe relevant to first of all think about why we do a poor job of making predictions in the first place. So I'm going to talk through a couple of factors. And in general, I think there are about three things that contribute to not doing a great job when it comes to actually predicting how many, what is likely to happen with a specific outcome. The first thing is what I'll call internal factors. So internal factors are factors that are scoped to us, the people that are trying to make the prediction. So we're not doing a very good job because of some things that are internal factors that are relevant to us specifically making the prediction. But also what I'll call micro factors. Micro factors are factors that are more specific to the system around which we're trying to make a prediction on. So this is scoped to the system around which you're making a prediction. And so those are things you need to take into account. Lastly is what I'll call, macro factors. And macro factors are factors that are external to the system that we're trying to predict around. And in that case, you need to think about, things that are outside of you and things that are outside of the system around which you're making a prediction and things that you can't really plan. So let's start, by taking one at a time, going through internal factors. The first internal factor is what I'll call ego, and essentially has to do with our inability to distinguish between luck and skill, the role of luck and skill in terms of making a prediction and the outcomes from our predictions. And to kind of illustrate this, I'm going to tell you a story about two bets that I made. Let me go back here real quick, retrace my steps. Okay, sorry about that. Just want to walk my way back through. So in this case, I picked a stock, when I first started, exploring the stock market. So in late 2015, I developed a strong interest in the stock market and investing. I did a lot of reading. I learned to read financial statements. And through that process, I was able to identify a stock that I felt was undervalued. And I picked this stock around that late 2015. And this stock over a period of 2 years, rose all the way to $200, which is the first time I actually trimmed my position in the stock. Now, that was a favorable outcome, and it was interesting to see how that turned out. For those of you that might be wondering where the stock is today, as of early 2020, it was over 200, and the stock price is actually over $300 as of when I checked today. So that was a favorable outcome. Another bet that I made was in the area of fantasy football. So for those who follow American football, or for those of you that don't, maybe fantasy football is basically this idea of picking a set of players with a league or a group of people, and you pick players for your team. And every week, depending on how the actual players perform in the game, your teams are matched against each other. And when you're picking your players at the beginning of the season, the safe assumption is that players you pick in the earlier rounds have higher value, and you're more likely going to do well with them. And players in the later rounds are kind of like a long shot. So anything from like 7th round, 8th round, all the way to your 12th round is a player that is likely not to do great. But I drafted a player, the quarterback for my team, in the 10th round, and that was the only quarterback I drafted. And that quarterback went on to pass for over 5,000 yards, score over 50 touchdowns. And for those of you who are football fans, you know that I'm talking about Patrick Mahomes. And this was 2 years ago. And he was on my team, and my team went on to win the league, which was really, really great. But you can see from this illustration that I had two bets. One was about picking a stock, one was about picking a player. And the problem with ego when it comes to predicting is I have these two favorable outcomes. If one is not able to deduce how much luck played or how much skill played into the outcome, then you're going to essentially do a poor job in predicting in the future. And it's very important for us to be able to do this. The tendency is for us, when things go well, is to think it's skill. Like I did a great job because of something I did. It's skill. But when it doesn't go according to plan, then we blame an external factor. And there's a term for this. One way to describe this is what they call the fundamental attribution error. And basically, it's that if I do something well, it's likely because I did something right and it was based on my skill. But if I don't do as well in it, the outcome is not favorable, then it was due to bad luck. Like if I get late to a meeting, it was due to traffic, it was some other reason, and I'm not able to take the credit for my role in it all. So that's the first thing that we need to kind of pay attention to is our inability to distinguish between the role of luck and skill in an outcome gets in the way of us being able to make good future predictions. Another essential obstacle to why we do a poor job or to our making good predictions essentially has to do with blind spots. And when I talk about blind spots, I talk about this gap in the learning equation. And by learning equation, I'm referring to this. So this is one way that I've seen learning described that I thought was very helpful, is that learning is kind of like a mix of pain plus reflection. The pain is there because you're learning something new and something you don't quite understand and you're walking through it. But the reflection bit is the bit that we often leave behind and don't pay as much attention. And this is what usually costs us in our ability to really be able to take our experience and do better with it in the future. I really love this quote that really try and captures this thought around the fact that experience is not what happens to you as a person. It's about what you do with what happens to you. And reflection is such a key aspect to it, because if you have a specific outcome and you want to essentially be able to lean on that experience to be able to make a prediction in the future, you need to have spent time reflecting and really trying to grasp how much, what were the factors that kind of played into that outcome. Something that is also very key that kind of gets in the way of being able to make good predictions is our emotions. And there's research studies that have shown that when you're upset, you usually make riskier decisions. If someone cuts you off on the highway, it's very likely that you might engage in a very risky behavior about how you drive or you trying to get back at them. And also research has actually shown that, if you're hungry and you're trying to buy stocks in the stock market, it's very likely that you might make very risky behavior as well. So it's kind of interesting to see how emotions play in us trying to project the future And I'm going to talk about ways in which we can kind of handle this. And the gambler's fallacy, it's an interesting concept that kind of goes along with this. And this is more so along the lines of how bias plays a part in how we're making decisions. And this is basically the misassumption that because something has been going, it has a certain pattern, is due for a change. So if you've been flipping a coin and you've been getting a lot of tails, you say, well, I'm due to get ahead. So this is what happened to gamblers in Las Vegas. And it keeps saying, this next one is going to be it. This next one is going to be it. And it's not often the case. So that fallacy and that bias kind of gets in the way. Another bias that gets in the way, which is a little bit of the flip side, is recency bias. This is when you overestimate the role of, when you look at things that happened recently, and it's overwhelmingly, feeds into how you perceive the future. And so a good example of this is if, I lived in Cincinnati for a period of time in Ohio, and we often get, some really heavy snow years, and sometimes, we don't get as much snow. And for someone who just moves to Cincinnati or to a place where it snows a lot, and you haven't gotten much snow in your first year, your second year, it's easy for you to think like, why did I buy a four-wheeler? Like, this place is not as cold, or it's not as much, there's not as much snow as I thought it would be. And that's because you're paying heavy attention to what happened recently instead of looking at it holistically. Such biases also get in the way of us being able to make future predictions. So something to definitely take into account. Now getting to the micro factors, and the micro factors, like I said before, are factors that are scoped to the system around which you're actually trying to make a prediction. And one of the way this kind of materializes itself is in terms of inability to make to take into account the impact of risk and uncertainty in terms of how we're making decisions. So we are not doing a good job of approximating, and so we are not able to have a good understanding of the weight certain factors have into an outcome that we're looking at. So our inability to do approximations well gets in the way of being able to make good predictions. Something else is also in the area of attention, and attention has more so to do with where you're paying a lot more of your focus, where you're focusing in terms of the story versus the stats. So most people probably know the statistics that it's safer to drive on the road than for you to, it's safer for you to fly than for you to actually drive on the highway. But when you see enough stories about plane crashes, it's easy to feel like it's a lot more riskier to be in an airplane than to actually, drive your car. And it's really interesting, just the power of stories play into actual statistics. And when a story about a startup is so overwhelming, that's as an example, you might have a wrong notion that it might succeed without paying attention to the numbers or to the details or to the financials. So something to definitely pay attention to is the influence of stories in terms of how we perceive a given situation in terms of looking ahead and being able to make a future prediction. The last of this is the macro factors. And there are several ways in which you can look at the macro factors in terms of external things that definitely influence how you predict in the future. But what I want to call out here is what I'll call black swan events. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in the talk. But a good example of a black swan event is the pandemic that is going on right now with COVID-19. This time last year, no one could have looked ahead to 2020 to say for sure, maybe except Bill Gates, for sure that there was going to be a pandemic and the world was going to shut down. Nobody could have ever believed that that was going to happen. But macro events like that are external to the system can definitely impact the future and how you actually predict what's going to happen. So we're going to take this one at a time, because what can we actually do about these factors? What can we actually do to actually improve how we predict things that happen in the future? The first of this is to find a way to really address this fundamental attribution error, where we are not able to distinguish well between skill and luck. And hacking intuition is kind of like one way that I think we can definitely address this. And by hacking intuition, what I'm saying here basically is write your assumptions and criteria down about a decision you're making. So if I'm picking a stock, just going back to my stock example, if I want to pick a stock and I'm projecting that in 6 months, a year out from now, is going to have a certain performance, I want to write down my assumptions, and I want to write down the criteria and factors that influence, why I'm thinking that way about that stock. 6 months and down in the future, or a year down the line, and I do a retrospective and I look back and I say, okay, did my assumptions go correctly? This really gets you past the gut feel of, I feel like this is why this is going to work out, to start really deconstructing the factors that play a part in your sense of intuition. This is one way to kind of get beyond the whole ego situation when it comes to making predictions. Something else that I think is extremely valuable is actually seeking disagreeable opinions. And this really addresses a lot of the bias references that I made earlier: confirmation bias, recency bias, or even the gambler's fallacy. And the way you do this, I think this quote by Ray Dalio really captures this idea, is rather than thinking I'm right, you need to start asking yourself, how do I know that I'm right? How do I know that I'm right? And what you're doing essentially is you're trying to force yourself to be open to factors that might not be in line with what you're thinking or what your assumptions are. And the way this has played itself out for me is when going back again to the stock selection process. I have a group of friends that I'm in a group chat with. And typically when I find a stock or an investment opportunity that I'm exploring, I usually share with them, and I'm looking for a disagreeable opinion. So I tell them, this is what I'm thinking, and this is why I think it's going to succeed. This is what I think is going to happen. And at times I've actually said the phrase, tell me why I'm crazy. It's because I really want to know. And having people that you trust around you that can actually give you disagreeable opinions is a great way to burst yourself out of that wrong assumption that you're always right. The confirmation bias is very deadly, is very dangerous, because we tend to look for information that reinforces what we already believe. And so this is one way to break away from that. That way you can actually think outside of how you're actually thinking, as far as, making a prediction goes. Another great way to actually deal with things related to micro factors to a system is actually applying the concept of systems thinking. And with systems thinking, what you're trying to do is you kind of deconstruct things to see how they are connected together. I love this illustration of the iceberg, and I think this is a good illustration. And I'm kind of curious to know how many people on here actually are aware of this fact. But if you know this fact, please go ahead and put it on the chat. How many people know when you look at an iceberg, what percentage of the iceberg is actually beneath the water? So go ahead and put it on the chat. I'll check it out. I'm curious to see what people might actually say. But it's interesting because without having a good understanding of what lies beneath, you have a tendency to actually miss it out. And being able to actually break it down and deduce this information allows you to actually see causality instead of focusing on just symptoms. So when you're looking at an outcome, the result of a presidential election, or how the economy turns out, or how your forecasting goes, you can go back and retrace and see what exactly happened. And okay, I can see some answers out there. Actually 90% of the iceberg is actually below the water. So you only see 10%. I see some answers in the channel. Only 10% of the iceberg is actually above the water. The remaining 90% is actually below the water. So there's a lot more to a situation than what you can see. And so when you're looking at a historical situation, and you want to be able to make a prediction about the future, or try and understand the root causes and to really dig deep into it, you need to be able to break it down. And systems thinking gives us a way to do it. Systems thinking kind of has a couple of key ideas around it. One is around looking at the elements that make up the system, also understanding the interconnections and the links between the elements within the system, and then finally the function and the purpose of the system. It's interesting because the one that has the strongest influence, it goes from bottom up. Function has the most influence, then interconnections, and lastly elements. And it's easy for us to focus on the elements that makes up a system. So in the case of, a good example is a political party. So in the United States here, we have the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. And if you think about each party as a system, they have a set of ideologies that bands them together. It doesn't matter who the actors are. You might change the actors here and there. You can almost predict what the political party is going to want to do, because that is the purpose binds them together. Similarly with a system, and with a system around which you're trying to make a prediction, really paying attention to the purpose and to the function of the system, that's where you can really be able to make the strongest influence and inference in terms of how things are going to be. If you understand the purpose and the function well, you can feel more confident about what you can predict about how the system might turn out. All right, so how do I apply this in the question of stock picking? So in the question of stock picking, going back to my example again, is, when you're thinking of the actors, the players that comprise the system, I'm thinking about company leadership, the talents. Is it a startup or an incumbent? When I'm thinking about the links, I'm thinking about, is it a founder-run company? Are they what part of the hype cycle? Are they on all the S-curve? I'm thinking about their financial statements. I'm thinking about the role all of that plays together. And then finally, I'm thinking about the purpose of the company. Like, what is the mission of the company? What is the culture that binds the company together? Because the vision of the company, because these things are the things that really have the strongest influence in terms of that. So if I have a good understanding of this gives me a way to be able to deconstruct my choice and the prediction I'm going to make around it, how a company is going to do by applying systems thinking to that particular situation. The other thing that's also very essential is being able to pay attention to patterns and not just events, because it's easy for you to see something happen, and it might happen very sharply, and you might put so much emphasis on it. And very often when it comes to exploring a system, you want to explore patterns, but the danger of patterns, if you're not careful, is you can fall into an illusion of a pattern, right? There's a book I read earlier in the year called The Drunkard's Walk that really illustrates it. But the idea of a drunkard's walk is the idea that you might have a drunkard might seem like he's walking randomly, but directionally he's moving in a specific direction. Similarly, you could have a set of you might see a set of dots that you connect, in retrospect, that seem to look like a pattern, but in reality, they were all random events. So when you think about making patterns, observing patterns, you want to be very careful not to try and mistake that together. A good example of this is an analysis that was done where they realized that this was maybe back in the 70s, they explored, and they saw that every time an NFC team, NFL team, the NFC team wins, then the stock market is going to be up. And every time an AFC team wins, the stock market is typically down for the year. And it's interesting because for quite a long time, that seemed to be the case, but they are not related in any form or fashion. So it was basically an illusion of a pattern. It was not really real. And you need to be careful about how you use and leverage patterns in terms of conclusions that you come to and how you want to predict the future. Also very essential is this idea of skin in the game. And I believe the idea of skin in the game gives you a way to pay attention to more details than you would ordinarily want to pay attention to. I love this quote by Nassim Taleb. He talks about the idea that how much you truly believe in something is manifested by how much you're truly willing to risk for it. The idea of being able to risk something or put a bet for something makes you think very hard about your bets you're making or the predictions you're making. And so it's very essential. This is how skin in the game comes into play and becomes very helpful for you. So when you have something to lose, the key idea here is you pay more attention. But there are situations that you come across when you're new to an organization, you're new to a situation, you don't have historical data, and you really don't have the competency and knowledge in that domain to be able to make a good prediction. And what I found that is very helpful is you have someone who you can lean on. We all do that. We have someone we can lean on, to check on, to provide us feedback on the situation. Now, the interesting thing is that it's not unusual to find advice like this. It's not uncommon to seek the opinion of someone who has nothing to gain from a favorable outcome. So you hear the idea that you hear often is that, I'm going to talk to this person about my relationship, about my job prospects, or a decision I'm about to make, because they don't have, they can be objective because they have nothing to gain from a favorable outcome. But I want to challenge that and actually push it a little further and say, what about if you lean on someone who has something to lose from an unfavorable outcome, right? Then it changes the game, because the person that is giving you this advice has the skin in the game. And the fact that they have skin in the game, they're going to pay attention to all the details in terms of the advice and they're giving to you when it comes to making a decision. When they don't have skin in the game, then I mean, how can you? It's more weighty when you can trust them. And I think that if you want to find what I'll call a muse, someone that can speak to you and you can turn to for guidance when it comes to making a prediction about something you're not sure about, there are two things that are very important. One, do they have skin in the game, right? Do they have something to lose if the outcome is not favorable? Two, you need to kind of ask, do they have a track record of being right? I think those two things are very essential. And I actually put this to practice about finding the muse. I know we might have a couple of NFL fans here, and some of you might be able to look at this and quickly tell what these two players have in common. If you can figure it out, it'll be interesting for you to share that on the chat. I'll be interested in knowing and seeing what you think about how these players play together. But it's interesting because I found these two players were on my fantasy football team in 2 consecutive years. And it was as a result of a muse I followed. It was an expert in fantasy football. And not only did he have a good track record of historical predictions, but he also had a skin in the game. So he's part of a app that makes predictions, a company that makes predictions, and they make bets on those predictions. So the skin in the game. If he's wrong about his prediction he's making, there's skin in the game, something for him to lose. Yeah, I can see that. So the interesting thing about it basically is the fact that these two players were the NFL MVP. And they were both on my fantasy football team. And it's really intriguing to think that, I could have back-to-back years these two players on my team, and I drafted them as the only quarterbacks on my fantasy football team. And they did amazing. They both won the NFL MVP that year. But it was due to this muse or this person I follow, this expert I follow in fantasy football. So find your muse in a situation where you don't have domain expertise or domain experience, or you're new to an organization and you need to make a prediction. Finding someone who has skin in the game and has a good track record of being right can be extremely helpful. The third thing I want to share really is around thinking probabilistically. And if there's nothing you take out of this part of the talk, if there's anything I want to take out of this part of this talk, is about this idea of thinking probabilistically. And I think learning to think this way actually tilts the odds in your favor. So what do I mean by thinking probabilistically? Another way to maybe wrap this idea is what is termed Bayesian thinking. And Bayesian thinking comes from this idea of the Bayes theorem. And Bayes theorem basically is really exploring the probability of an event based on prior knowledge that you might have related to that event. And basically the key thing here is that you are thinking about the outcome as a probability, not as a sure thing, one way or the other. And to take this in terms of deeper is this idea that you are admitting a sense of incomplete knowledge when you are basically speaking about the plausibility of an event. So a lot of people have made predictions that there might be a recession in the coming year. But a year ago, some people were making a similar prediction. But given the current economic situation and with the pandemic around the world, their confidence level is a little higher. So maybe last year, they were confident maybe about 60% that this was going to actually happen, but their confidence has gone a lot higher. And that's the idea of Bayesian thinking and probabilistic thinking. It's basically an openness to revise your thinking based on new information. This is basically an admittance that I can't predict the future 100% one way or the other, but my belief about what's going to happen increases when I have more information and reinforces it. But if I get new information to the contrary, maybe my confidence level decreases. And so that's the idea of Bayesian thinking, is you're opening your mind to revise your thinking about an outcome. You're not locked in to say this is definitely going to happen. And so you open yourself up to new information. Now, this really presses down a philosophical path to really ask if beliefs are grayscale, because it's easy for us to think of beliefs as black and white. Think about anything you believe. The question is, do you believe it like 100%? Is it black or is it white? Or is there a high confidence level that you have? And it starts to make you think that, is there new information that might revise my thinking about my specific feelings or my belief about how something is going to happen. And Bayesian thinking basically encourages you to say, think probabilistically and open your mind up to new information. If you get new information and maybe you want to revise your opinion on something. It's interesting because our society and the world at large avoids being called this. You don't want to be called a flip-flop. A lot of politicians hate that term and don't want to be seen that way. But is that really a bad thing? Is it really bad to flip-flop if you get new information that changes your mind? Now, I'm not talking about flip-flopping or changing your mind in something just to please an audience or to please a group of people. I'm talking about revising your opinion about a person, about a situation, about a specific outcome based on new information. And if you look at things probabilistically, then you're open-minded to do it. And maybe you don't mind being called a flip-flop by simply saying, you know what, I got new information that has changed my mind. I think this is now plausible. So this is really an interesting idea. Of the idea of thinking probabilistically really forces you to say, I'm not 100% sure. I feel a high confidence level. You can put whatever number you want to it. But if I get new information, then I can kind of revise my thinking about a given situation and what I think about the outcome, what might be. In reality, your beliefs don't change reality, maybe except yours. Ultimately, what you're trying to do through Bayesian thinking is adjust your beliefs so it gets closer and closer to reality based on new information. So that's the key thing there, is really trying to be open-minded and to think probabilistically about any predictions that you make in the future. So now moving to the macro factors, and this is the big boy right here, right? Because this is the factor that is external to a system that you have very little control of. And, speaking again, this is similar to what we have. But the idea of anti-fragility gives us a way to be able to set us up to gain in the midst of chaos and disorder. So what do I mean by that? All right, so this is a turkey. Here in the United States, every November, you have Thanksgiving, and the turkeys don't have such a great time. But if you think about the turkey, for 364 days of the year, the farmer is his best friend. Oh my goodness, I was here, and the farmer lets me roam free range, and he gives me food, he takes care of me. Man, the farmer must love me and want to keep me for a long time. Only to find out on a day 365 that maybe that's not actually the case. And that's just a reality. It's not just about being able to predict accurately. Everything we've talked about so far is what you can do to be better at making predictions. But what about being able to be prepared for any outcome? Being prepared to be able to gain in the midst of disorder if something doesn't go the way you were hoping it was going to go. And just in the light of that is being able to assess and be careful of how you look at historical data. In the past, we've looked at the different coronaviruses that have been around in the world, and none until maybe going back onto 1918 resulted in such an impact on this. So it's very easy for you to look and say, well, no coronavirus is going to ever have such an impact where you're going to have to shut down and lock down the whole world for weeks on end. And so this is really this idea of, admitting and realizing that the absence of proof is not proof of absence. And the Black Swan basically encapsulates this idea. I think all the way up to maybe the 17th century, nobody ever knew or could believe that a Black Swan existed. And in reality, it's not until they finally saw one that they believe that, well, Black Swan exists. That's why when my daughter asked me, if unicorns are real, it's hard for me to say 100% for sure that, a unicorn is not real, because it's not real until it is. But I just tell her, based on what we know and based on the facts that we have, it's just a mythical creature. So it's really interesting how you take information, historical information, to prepare for a Black Swan event, an unexpected event that you would never anticipate before. So taking an anti-fragile strategy allows us to be able to gain or be able to manage ourselves when the unknown or an unfavorable outcome comes out. And a good example of this is Bill Ackman, who is an investor who, when the stock market crashed back in March, almost like 30% in a couple of days, he got about $2.2 billion based on his bets that he made. And it's kind of captures that idea that in the midst of chaos, that is possible to gain. Now, people might have different opinions and feelings about that, but that is the whole idea and concept of being anti-fragile, because he was hedging his other investments bets by betting on this. And one way to look at an anti-fragile approach is really trying to say, I'm going to go with a safe approach, but I'm also going to make a speculative approach in case I'm wrong. And a good example of this is this question of, is there going to be a recession or not a recession? With the employment numbers we've seen and the trajectory with which we have, I really hope we don't have to go through a tough experience in the coming months. But if you want to approach an anti-fragile approach strategy, you want to be thinking, well, how am I going to manage my job, or what I have to do right now? But at the same time, invest in a side hustle that's likely to thrive when there's a recession. If you think about companies like Chipotle, Walmart, and a lot of the grocery stores that are and food retail places, or Amazon, that are thriving in the midst of this situation, is that they are bets they made, which allows them to be able to thrive in the midst of chaos. So that's basically the idea of being anti-fragile. So that's one of the ways in which you manage those macro events that you don't have control over. Another way is by employing or leveraging pre-mortems. Now, a post-mortem is a familiar thing that you do. Basically, once something happens with a project, you go back and think and reflect on why did something go wrong. And this is what I was talking about earlier when I talk about the whole point about reflection. However, what about if you can anticipate failure and you can prepare for it? And basically, the way this might illustrate itself when it comes to a project you're working on at work is you ask yourself, this project I'm working on, a year from now, the project was an absolute failure. What are the 10 reasons why this project was an absolute failure? No, nobody wants anything to fail, but if you really want to take an approach to anticipating failure and dealing with macro events that you don't have control over, then these are the kind of things that you want to think about. And so when you draw these factors that play into why something, the things that might result to a failure of a project or whatever it is that you're trying to do, then you rank them. You rank them by saying, which one is going to be the most impactful, and then also which do I feel less certain about, that I don't have enough information, that I don't know quite as well. And basically, then you rank those factors, and then you take them one at a time. You're essentially trying to say, okay, I'm going to address this, I'm going to address this. I've applied this approach on several projects in the past and had tremendous success in being able to apply pre-mortems to a project. So this, again, is less about being predicting or being right about your predictions, but more so having a favorable outcome if you're wrong. And that's one way in which you really can manage macro events that you can control. So as you draw this together, you start to realize that this whole idea is around is the fact that knowledge is indeed highly subjective. But when you try to quantify it and you think of it as a bet, then you start to realize that there's much more in making a prediction, is in your ability to quantify it and think of it as a bet. I think that's one key thing to kind of draw out of everything I've talked about today. So how do you go about applying some of these ideas? How do you actually become awesome or better at making predictions? Well, I feel like to learning any new thing, any new skill, or any new experience, it's essential for two things are essential: immersion and imitation. Immersion, by that I mean, is being able to explore and read and learn about things about predictions. So things like I've talked about at this talk. And exploring how you can have a better way of thinking about making predictions. The second is imitation, is also trying to see people that do a good job of making predictions and trying to understand what factors play into the outcome that he had. And one of the ways in which you can do this as far as immersion is books that I think you can read. You want to definitely try and have a deeper grasp of mental models and potential algorithms. So there's a great book, this book here, Mental Models. It talks about 30 ways in which you can think about decision making that can give you a higher likelihood, like a heuristic or a way to make a decision that is likely to come out favorable, because this is how things typically work. A good example of this is the Pareto principle, the 20-80 rule. That 20% of people typically do 80% of the work, or 80% of the outcome can be explained by 20% of the factors. And being able to think about this in a holistic way really takes you a lot further. Whenever I'm learning anything new or exposing myself to a new domain, I typically like to ask experts, what is the 20% I need to pay attention to get 80% of the way? So that's one of the ways in which mental models can be very helpful. And I think this book is a great book. It definitely makes for a great read. Something else is another great book is Algorithms to Live By. And it really goes into a lot of computer science related algorithms that you'll be surprised to find out how they apply to normal real life. So things like normal distribution are things that people are aware of. Compounding is also a very powerful concept. But the linear effect is actually the one I find really compelling and really interesting. Because one of the things that linear effect really captures is this idea that if something has been around for 1,000 years, it's likely going to be around for another 1,000 years. So you think about books like, mythology books like Homer's Iliad has been read for thousands of years. Or the Bible, or the Quran, books like that, it's very likely that books like that are going to be read 1,000 years from now. And a book that maybe just came out a year ago, according to the linear effect, might only be around for another year. You can apply this to computer programming languages, and things like that. I'm currently working on a book that I'm hoping to get published, this year or next year. I don't know how my book is going to last, but the linear effect might be in fact on that as well. So this is really something interesting to kind of think about as how algorithms can actually play a part. I'll give you a good example of one of the algorithms covered in this book, and that is that if you go to a mall or to a place where it's parking, if according to this, if you stay in the lane or the aisle for 6 minutes, it's likely that a parking spot would actually open up. And I've tried this before many times, and it's a heuristic I apply right now. So these are the kind of things you can look to leverage to make you better at making predictions and being right. Ultimately, you only get better by doing. And I think you want to make more bets. You want to try to predict more often. And then you also want to track your record. This really gives you a way to essentially be able to get better, see what it is you're doing differently, and how you're applying some of these ideas to actually be better at what you're actually trying to make a prediction on. So this wraps up my talk. I know I covered a lot of information today, and I definitely want to make room for any questions that anybody might have on the channel. I'm checking out the channel right now to try and pay attention to it. This is a way for you to stay or reach out to me. If you connect with me on LinkedIn, just mention that you heard my talk on CouchCon, and I'll be happy to connect and to answer any questions or anything that might be of interest to you. I really thank you once again for making time to be here today to hear me speak. And I want to give a shout out to Chris, to Missy, and to everyone else who were really instrumental to put in this talk, this conference together, improving as well. Really appreciate the opportunity. I'm grateful for the opportunity to actually be able to speak and actually share with you today. So that kind of wraps up everything I'm saying for what I have said today. I'm going to look into Slack. You can engage through Slack. I'm just going to wait a couple of minutes to see if there are any questions that come in here. I'll be more than happy to stay on for a little bit and maybe try and provide some feedback or answer any questions that you might have. All right, so I have a question that are there any specific mental models that you found are very common and completely wrong? That's very interesting. So this might go maybe so more philosophical, and I'm not sure if this is actually part of what I'm actually going to be writing my book on. As far as mental models, I think it's typically the advice you hear from people is that you should follow your passion. That by following your passion, that's how you're going to succeed and you're going to find your purpose in life. I think that mental model is wrong or is not commonly right. I found if you do a study and you look back historically, you find that more often than not, people do well and find a purpose in something they're really good at. And in the course of that journey, they end up developing a sense of passion for what it is they're actually pursuing. So that's one mental model that I found. I think is really an interesting question, but that's one thing I found that is commonly accepted, but I think is not really correct. And I found another question. Drunken walk sounds similar to that phenomenon with kids guessing the gumballs. Is there a relation? Maybe so. the idea of people, guessing gumballs has to do more so with the fact that there's something about having a collection of people and being able to take their input and the different angles by which they see things based on their past experiences. And they, kind of like looking at input from different angles. And when you have that mixed together, it kind of fills in the gap, it fills in the dots. So going back to the gumball question, gumball illustration, you find that there are people of different age ranges there, and they see things differently. And that combination of the different perspectives, average together gets you a very good place, closer to reality and what's actually true and correct. So that's how that gumball illustration, I think, plays a part. As far as the drunkard's walk goes, it's more so this question of how it's easy to be misled by or not to see the pattern by random events. So things that look totally random actually might be leading in a specific direction. So I see some loose connection between the drunkard's walk and the idea of guessing the number of gumballs in the gumball machine. But it's slightly different, but I think they have a bit of a relationship between them. All right. I saw another question. How do you develop accurate systems of things you care about in systems thinking, iterative development? Yes, I think it takes trial and error. And I think it's really all about, being able to look deeply into what, plays a part in the outcome of things. So if you're thinking in terms of the elements that which are the actors, how things are connected and the function and purpose of something, then you can start extracting potentially if it's correct. So you've been able to test some of the ideas, your hypothesis about what changes or more might impact the overall, I think gives you a way to better be more accurate in terms of how you want to, deduce, get an accurate view of the system that you're trying to work with. And I do think it's iterative. But I think starting with looking at a system and thinking, what are the actors, what are the elements, how are things connected together, and what is the function and purpose of the system, really helps you to kind of separate and really see those things clearly that are beneath the water in that iceberg illustration. Okay, I'm trying to see if there are any more any more questions. All right. I think that's it. I don't have anything else. I don't see any more questions. I'm going to take a quick pick at Slack. If I don't have a chance and things wrap up here, I can always pick it up. Feel free to reach out to me on Slack, on LinkedIn, or Twitter. So thank you very much. I really appreciate this opportunity once again, and have a wonderful Saturday. Bye-bye. Mm-hmm.
Oh, apparently I've been muted this whole time. Okay, what would the day be without without a few little hiccups? Okay, so I was just going to mention, I'm going to have you come over. I'll give a full kind of closing announcements kind of thing in track 1, so feel free to head over there. We'll be wrapping that up in a couple minutes. But I want to give a big shout out to my fellow organizers here, Chris Steele and Missy with Zag Studios, Chris Steele with Improving. I couldn't have done this without you two, so thank you very much. I appreciate it. And then I also want to throw a shout out to our graphics designer, or the graphic talk designer, the person who did Steve Smith's talk, Ashton. That was so cool. It was really awesome. And I want to thank all of the speakers today. The speakers did a fantastic job. Loved what they did. The talks, we wouldn't be here and we wouldn't have the content for all of you without our speakers. So go ahead and head over to track 1. I'll see you over there shortly. And I hope you had a great day. Take the things that you've learned today. I'll kind of echo off of Code Mesh here. I love how Code Mesh ends every year in the way of try one thing. Take one thing that you have learned today and try to put it into practice right away. Monday when you go back to work, probably remote, or if you're not at work, try it in a side process or with some people. We had some great human skills and other talk. Take something you learned today and put it into practice to better yourself and to keep growing. Well, I thank you for your time. I'll see you over in track 1, and I hope you have a great week. Bye.